Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 6, episode 25. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week, I have a lovely conversation with Sussie, a 27-year-old British Ghanaian novelist based in London. She came on my radar after a beautiful essay she wrote for lithub.com about her experience with misophonia, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Also, if you've been paying attention, we actually both appeared earlier this week in an article about misophonia in the UK newspaper The Evening Standard. We talk here about the stresses and internal feelings growing up as an immigrant and ethnic minority in a new land, how past memories affect the body in the present. We talk about her writing, journaling, meditation, as well as living and working under lockdown and long COVID. Let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. Some news, actually, if in case you don't know, we've launched transcripts for all episodes, most episodes. There's a few that are still to come, but you can find them on the website, misophoniapodcast.com, at the bottom of the page for every episode. They're not 100% accurate. They're mostly machine generated, but we'll be improving them over time. It's been a great request because there are some folks who don't necessarily want to hear audio, don't like to listen to podcasts, and this is a great way to read it at your leisure. And also, can also mention all episodes are also on YouTube, and YouTube has its own live transcription. But the one on the website, misophoniapodcast.com, you can just read it all in one go. You don't have to turn on captioning. If you enjoy the show, and just a reminder, please leave a quick review or rating wherever you listen to the podcast. It really helps us drive up in the algorithms and reach more listeners. Thanks for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters, and that's a big part of what helped get these transcripts made, and will continue to do so in the future. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels that start, I think, at like $3 or $5 at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. All right, now here's my conversation with Sussie. Sussie, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So I usually like to ask folks kind of where are you located?
So I'm based in London, South London, really far south.
Oh, very far south. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just there over the Christmas break in London, just kind of with family, just doing sightseeing, but in central London. So
Where are you based, if you don't
I'm
mind me
in.
asking?
Oh yeah, I'm in Minnesota. So in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the U.S. Quite cold
Oh,
over here.
yeah.
Yeah. So you want to tell us kind of what you do?
Yeah. So I'm a civil servant, but at the moment I am writing full time. So I took a step back from my job to focus on publishing my first novel and finishing writing my second one. So yeah, at the moment just writing full time.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think you came to my attention because you wrote a beautiful, I think it's a blog post or something on lithub.com. It kind of came my way.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that eventually. But that's cool that you're working, but then you've taken some time off to focus on writing. It's really hard to find that, to juggle those. So it's great that you're able to get that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've always wanted to try at least as well, like just focusing on writing and see what that is like. Because I kind of idealized it a bit in my head. So I'm like, well, let's see what it's actually like when the
Yeah.
pandemic happened. So it feels great to have had that
So do
for
you want to
sure.
maybe so I guess maybe you want to talk about you wrote this post around in November, and I'll have a link to it. We'll get to your background eventually, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious kind of what led you to write that. Did somebody ask you to write that, or were you just kind of compelled to write about misophonia?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's been something that I wanted to be able to be honest about for a very long time. And I felt that stepping back from work, taking time to reflect on my creative practice and what made me want to be a writer and where my stories come from, where my love for storytelling comes from as well. I felt like definitely, I'm probably going to mispronounce it as well because I've not even spoken about it aloud like this
Mm.
ever really properly. But
You're not the
Misophonia,
first one. Yeah, many people have come on and said that same thing.
yeah. But yeah, I felt like I want to get to a point in my life at some point where I would be able to reflect on that aspect of my human experience and it is life because it's been part of my experience since I was very, very young. So yeah, it was kind of the elephant in the room with
Yeah.
me. So I wanted to write my first personal essay type thing about that very personal space in my life. And it was quite tough to do, putting it into words. So I kind of went meta and just said, well, this is tough to write about, which is kind of the cliche thing for a writer to do. But it was great to be able to get it out there and to, yeah, now it's there. So I can kind of have that to reflect on and other people read it perhaps and connect to it well. And people connected me to you as well. So yeah, finding more of a community around it too.
Yeah,
Feels
absolutely.
important.
And what I really liked about it, it wasn't just just another article that explains that it's this extreme annoyance with sound, but you kind of like I don't want to so I sound cliche, but you give it a more kind of poetic, a little kind of a deeper exploration of it, which I'm always looking for because yeah, there's so many layers, and it goes back so many years. We have so many experiences that are shaped by it that it's good to see a kind of a rich, kind of more emotional exploration of it.
Yeah, I think as well. I've seen a lot more articles about it, especially more recently. But sometimes it does feel like they're maybe covering things that might not be that helpful for people who actually
Hmm.
experienced it, which has its place and its role. But like some articles that will go into a lot of detail about triggers or almost sensationalizing it a bit and making it to be a very weird thing.
Right.
So yeah, it we wanted to approach it from a different kind of angle.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of there are a lot of kind of I don't know, seem like clickbaity articles that make it seem like this
Yeah.
weird quirk or idiosyncrasy. But it's a little bit deeper than that, and it hits us harder than that on more
Um,
layers. Yeah.
yeah.
So you said it goes back to childhood. Do you want to talk about kind of when you first started to notice it and what was going on around that time?
Yeah. So I don't remember not having it or not being aware of it. I think it's been there for as long as like from my earliest memories, albeit in a smaller way. It almost felt like a shadow that has spread and that I'm aware that it can spread, which has made me go quite cautiously, even in how I talk about it, because so much of it is in the head,
Hmm.
in whatever way it occurs neurologically. It's difficult sometimes to separate that from the fear of how big it might become. So the fear of it and the actual experience of a trigger, they've been there for as long as I have been self-aware enough to feel it. But I think I never really realized it was a medical or like a biological issue until maybe in my teens. It was kind of spiritual thing for me, perhaps even a curse or something. So I grew up
Hmm.
quite a religious context, and it just never found a vocabulary or found any kind of framework that could contextualize what I was experiencing or could enable me to navigate and make sense of it. So yeah, my instinct was, well, this is a weird curse. Maybe it'll go away.
Yeah.
All of this the weird tangle of unpleasant feelings. Why does nobody else seem bothered? And is this some kind of test that I've been specially chosen for? Or have I done something to be punished with this? And yeah, it was a very isolating thing when I was very young because I think I realized very quickly that most people probably don't feel the same way because how could adults go about in a world where it's just the norm to feel so uncomfortable a lot of the time? I realized that, okay, I'm kind of on my own
Yeah.
in this. Yeah.
Do you don't remember a time when it wasn't bothering you? Like a lot of folks remember that, oh, well, my parents started to annoy, or, it start with my parents or something at the dinner table. But for you, you don't remember a time when it wasn't a problem.
I don't remember a time when it wasn't. I think
Hmm.
as well, I don't remember a lot of my like very early years. Like maybe I blocked some of it out, but I think probably I remember it as a much smaller annoyance. And like
Hmm.
there are maybe one or two triggers that I was kind of thinking, okay, well that's an issue, but I can just avoid that. It's no big deal. And then it kind of spread, and I realized maybe when I was about 6 or 5 that
Hmm.
okay, this is a much more complex beast here, and it is a dynamic thing. It's going to grow, and it's not just something that's going to be scary. It will also make you feel other things that I don't understand yet. And Um, yeah, it was quite scary to go through that at a young age, but it
Yeah.
felt normal in a way because I didn't know what it was like to be completely comfortable.
Right.
There were always things I would avoid, and I think I expected that they would fade rather because adults and my older siblings seemed much more chill. I was like, well, probably I'm just gonna like come through this and I'll be like them eventually, but it sadly got worse. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you express it as you were starting to feel these things? Did you lash out or just kind of bottle it up?
Yeah. So at first I did try to negotiate and explain things, but it quickly learned that that wasn't going to work. I think it's when my family, the approach is very much if something is tough, best to face it head on and
Mm-hmm.
get used to it because the world is tough and you have to fight for space in this world. So I remember mentioning like a trigger was bothering me when we were on holiday together, and my family's response was, "Okay, well let's all do it together now. Like let's do it loads more to make her get used to it."
Uh-huh.
I was just like, "Oh no, they just don't get like, how awful this feels." And
Yeah.
I also realized that telling people about it can be counterproductive. I was really young when this happened. I think it made me quite um go quite into myself
Mm-hmm.
and become very determined to survive on my own, almost take pride in being quite like self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like telling people can't help if they're receptive to it, but it can also leave a scar, and you kind of
Yeah.
can kind of go inwards because, a lot of especially, um, maybe uh, older, we've had a lot of these experiences where we've tried to tell people, and maybe we get shrugged off, and eventually we just kind of like don't have the energy to kind of like to kind of share. And so yeah, we just learn to become more self sufficient, and looks like you learned that at a young age. Um, you said something about earlier. Maybe a lot of stuff was blocked out at that age. Was there anything in particular that you were trying to block out?
I really can't remember it. It's only
Mm-hmm.
more recently. I think it was a very difficult time growing up because like we
Mm-hmm.
from my parents were from Ghana, so like the time where we lived in Barnet as well, which is a borough really, really far north in London, we were like a really visible minority. So I already felt a bit like, okay, this is going to be an interesting childhood and I'm going to have to
Yeah.
be really careful. And I had some very early experiences of racism, which made me feel like an alien already. So to
Right.
have these other experiences as well, I think I did get through my early years by just hiding a lot and by blocking out a lot of things that were difficult. I've had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
like imaginary um, spaces in my head and in friendships as well. We were going to like imaginary play, and that was almost where real life seemed to be happening. And it's almost like my early memories are brimming with the more vivid and positive stories that we told and the games that we played through rather than the material condition, the real circumstances that it was in. I think it also felt I shared a room with younger brother and older sister. So it was very intense. Like I couldn't escape. Someone always had a
Yeah.
cold. Someone was always doing something annoying. And I would go into the garden. We were lucky that it had like a massive garden. It was really beautiful. And I loved just going out into the garden sometimes when it was a bit too much. And I think that's where I really found my refuge. And I still, to this day, I'll go out into like a big park or somewhere
Mm-hmm.
that's got that sense of openness, just being under the sky, open sky, and being a bit distant from other people in a confined kind of way. That's where I found my safety as a kid, and my memories, yeah, were of being outdoors or the imaginary realm and playing and being creative in those happier moments. I think
Yeah,
more
it's
than the
interesting.
reality. Yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting. So you'd moved, and unfortunately, you were having um, like too many people like running into these difficult experiences and wanting to kind of like kind of created your own imaginary spaces in your head. Like a lot of us,
yeah.
we get away and we try to listen to music, and I lived in headphones, like I think you said in this
Oh,
article,
so much.
and then yeah, but also then sharing. Were your siblings kind of your first triggers? And I can see how that would, when you're trying to cling to this imaginary space and then having it perturbed, that could cause issues,
Yeah,
sensitivities
siblings.
to sound.
Yeah, probably were. And I think I've read in a few cases as well that people say that when a trigger comes from a loved one, it feels like a double attack. It
Mm-hmm.
feels so much worse. And that was really horrible because I did want to be a lot closer to my siblings growing up, especially as we literally shared a room. But there were times when I just could not and couldn't explain it as well, which is really was really frustrating. I think I was a bit of a people pleaser as a kid as well. Like I really wanted to be nice and to be liked. And that's difficult when I just couldn't stand to
Be
be
around
around
them.
someone for, yeah, for a really long time. So I did struggle with that. But I think like certain like I could get my sister to tell me when my brother had fallen asleep, so I knew he wouldn't make a certain noise because we were like on the bunk bed and he was on the bunk below me.
Mm.
And I would say like, let me know when he's asleep, and I would just be covering my ears until she would kind of wake from the bed and say, yeah, he's gone. You can you can chill out a bit more now.
Yeah, yeah.
But there were ways in which they did support me, and we did have a bit of an understanding. Yeah, that helped
And
a little bit.
did any of them ever develop misophonia as well, or show signs of it, or has it just been you?
Potentially, I don't want to go into too much detail for them
Sure,
because I
sure.
think they're also still on their journeys with other things as well. But at the time it was me just on my own going through it, and there wasn't so maybe because we didn't have the internet until a bit later as well, but there wasn't so much of a yeah the vocabulary or the
Mm-hmm.
framework of even like mental health challenges as well. It was very much like oh mental health is a Western illness,
Mm-hmm.
uh, kind of just like toughen up that narrative at the time. But I think it's much better now. There's a lot more discussion, much more of a vocabulary to talk about these challenges.
How were things at school around that time? Were you also being triggered at school?
Yeah. Looking back, I don't know how I survived. Honestly, I look back and I'm like, I went to a book club because I love to read. Unsurprisingly, I went
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
recently the other day, and I was just so aware of all the fiddling and all the little things that were just driving me insane. I was like, how did I get through school?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because now I think as well, it probably has gotten worse. And well, when I was a kid at school, I think the belief as well, almost in a way, ignorance was bliss because I believed that things would get better, and I believed that to an extent with some kind of Christian guilt as well. I thought maybe I'm being punished or tested,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm a really good student, I'm a really good daughter, things will get easier. And there's a lot of talk in the Pentecostal tradition that I was raised in about the mind kind of rising above like the flesh or the body, like the body being kind of doomed anyway, and the spirit being like the real, pure human, humanistic space or dimension where life happens. So I was quite comfortable accepting hardship or accepting things being difficult and almost saw that as a sign of, well, this is a sign that like the future will be better or that uh, I'm going to learn from this or I expected some kind of compensation, maybe. So it made the really tough parts easier to bear at the time. Yeah,
You
but it
thought
was
of
horrible.
as
It was
you
really
thought of it as
horrible.
kind of as a potential gift to kind of rise above it in the future.
Yeah, in a
Yeah.
way. And I also felt almost like I deserved it, or that like we're all fallen creatures. So of course life on Earth is going to be horrible and full of
Mm-hmm.
suffering. And again, being an ethnic minority as well in the area where I was, it was like, well, are you surprised that life is tough? Like there are
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
much worse stories. Like, I was just really aware of other ways in which people suffered that and being reminded of that as well, I think made me have a bit more distance from my own immediate pain, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And for other like non-sound stuff, were you was it all you know, I was also raised in a pretty religious childhood, so there yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of that there's a lot of you know, guilt was a great tool for getting kids to do stuff. Was there a lot of kind of like guilt and shaming that in general in your childhood? I don't want to like parent blame but I'm just, you know, in
Yeah.
general, maybe in your religious childhood. I'm just curious if that was a part of life beyond just misophonia.
Definitely. Definitely. And
Mm.
it was almost a beautiful thing. You know, it's like, oh, we're all fallen and guilty and horrible, but
Yeah.
there's salvation and there's hope. So there was yeah, compensation in an
Yeah,
afterlife
yeah.
or in a future, or a sense of suffering being balanced out by some something else. And yeah, the sense of the physical experience being only one side of the story
Mm-hmm.
definitely helped. And I almost felt like, because I never really felt like a child when I was a kid. I was quite precocious, but I was also very careful to keep that hidden. I was very like distant from myself because very young I learned that okay, I'm going through some horrible stuff that no one else seems to experience, so I've got to be the one to always be looking ahead. It's very hyper vigilant. Like, look into a room. If I go into a room, I've got a strategy of like where is a safe space to sit, which person is likely to make trigger sounds or whatever. What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to sit? At what time can I take a toilet break if things are too much? I would be calculating everything.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I would even plan like, okay, I'm going to have like this imaginary adventure in my head when the time gets to this to just like distance myself from the surroundings. So I always felt a bit, yeah, it was almost like a game reality because I felt like, well, my body is just this temporary state, so it's tough, but there are some ways to get through it, and in the long term, maybe there'll be like a better world that we'll be able to live in,
Right.
which helped a bit.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
did you it's not oh I'm 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 curious, did you ever at some point see like a professional therapist or anything for misophonia? It sounds like it in your childhood, like meant for many of us, this is not considered serious or mental health is not
yeah.
talked about. So that was never on the table. But I'm curious if yeah, if you ever went to see anybody.
Not as a kid. It was
Mm.
only, yeah, when I went to university and I lost my faith. Like everything collapsed.
Mm.
So that was it was kind of okay, I need help because
Yeah, yeah.
like all the little stories and narratives that I'd made up to try and get some respite, they I couldn't turn to them anymore. And I was also at university, so I was far from home. I had just found the word misophonia as well, just randomly on the internet in like the comment section. I think someone was saying, "Oh, if you're bothered by this, it might mean that you have this." And it's I kind of got this instinctive feeling when I saw the word
Yeah.
that I was like, that and I hadn't thought of it, yeah, as a medical or as a physical, neurological issue, because my faith was just about crumbling and I was kind of accepting, like, okay, well, maybe mental health is a thing and maybe
Mm-hmm.
curses aren't a thing and maybe I need to like think about mental health hygiene and respect my body more and
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it more and try to make it feel more like home. So yeah, it was a lot at the time. I think a lot of people go to university and have this moment of it's almost like coming of age
Mm-hmm.
time where you're removed from like the things that you might take for granted or the routines or the friendships or the family and the connections that reinforce whatever worldview that you grew up in. And yeah, it was very far, I was very isolated. I was very good at isolating myself and I wouldn't realize that I was doing it as well, that I was pushing people away because I felt safest when I was by myself. And I've just become very isolated at university, so I had to get out that time.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's I think a similar kind of thing happened to me in terms of faith. Yeah, there's a lot of questioning around that
Really.
time,
Yeah.
and so and I guess that questioning everything. You know, when you're an introvert, kind of like leads you to become probably more of an introvert, and and so and did you notice your misophonia change around that time at all? Because it seems like a quite a uh, yeah, like a pretty heavy period, like of a lot of change, and must have been pretty intense. I'm curious if your misophonia also accelerated or changed in any way.
That's a really good question. That's a question I'm still
It
struggling
may
with.
not
I
have because you could have just had so many other
yeah,
things going on that it was just a constant thing. I'm just curious.
it,
Um,
it's something I find really difficult to measure
yeah.
because yeah, it's that thing I mentioned earlier about it all being in the head. So there's stuff that feels very intense and that is just very difficult to override and kicks in like fight or flight. Cannot negotiate with it. My brain will just be like, get out. But then there are also some more nebulous feelings or echoes of that, which is more about the anticipation of
Mm-hmm.
being uncomfortable or the anxiety of worrying about it, or even having flashbacks and thinking like, oh, last time I was in a similar setup, I felt this way. And I think reading about it and reading the word made it feel 1,000 times more intense because I was suddenly very aware of it. And I was aware that it's not going to go away, that it's probably wired into me in some way, that there's no cure. That was the scariest thing to read about as well.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
part of me had been holding out, like, okay, at some point, like, I'll go see a doctor about these weird symptoms that aren't completely connected. And maybe I'll have surgery and it'll fix something, or maybe I could, don't know, like, change something. Like, there must be like medication, like there are antidepressant, anti-anxiety pills that you can take. I'll probably eventually find something to deal with some of these symptoms I felt.
Hmm.
But it was seeing the term misophonia, bundling it all together, and starting to read about other people's experiences of it too, which I've not done that much since because, and I also will avoid certain articles too because again, it's the thing about anticipating it, making it sometimes worse if I'm aware that, oh, some people have found this triggering, or some people have also found that
Hmm.
triggering that I found at some point, and then I find myself thinking, how does that feel? Do I feel triggered by that? Does it feel bothersome? And that in its way can make me feel like the shadow of misophonia is much bigger than perhaps it would have been, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I agree. A lot of people, right, say that they do pick up triggers as maybe they read about it or read about other
Yeah.
people's experiences. So I won't mention too many here, but it's like what you said about shadows and just kind of, and so you obviously said earlier fight or flight. I'm curious, like in the in the moment, for a lot of it, it feels like we're in sudden danger, and I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you've ever thought about try to um, remind yourself, because I sometimes try to remind myself that if I'm going to enter a situation, nothing's dangerous here. I'm not going to get jumped, and somehow that kind of calms my mind down, and I'm wondering if there is some kind of an old memory or something in some part of us that is trying to protect us, and if we can somehow calm that down, maybe it's some shadow from the past. I'm curious if you've ever kind of thought about that or thought about it as a um, as some part of your mind trying to warn you of something that's not there, and if you've tried to kind of
Yeah.
calm it down.
That's so interesting. Definitely. And I was reading as well. I think as well, like there are a lot of potential associated conditions and challenges that come from growing up with it and from the ways in which some of us might try to cope
Hmm.
with misophonia. Like I was reading about CPTSD as well. Like if you
Right.
are exposed to repeated trauma as a young person as well, like you might be more likely to have flashbacks or see things as more threatening than perhaps they are. And definitely with some of the situations that I've been stuck in because I couldn't, as a kid, I couldn't get out, and having to almost just let go and say, okay, my body is just in absolute turmoil and I can't get out. So I just have to just feel horrible for ages. And it will take a while probably to feel safe again. Those situations, I can see rationally that my mind would try to protect me from being in that kind of situation again now. So if I go into a room and I see the slightest hint that someone might do something that will make me
Yeah.
feel a certain way, I'll think back to the last time that it was the worst case.
Right.
And I will probably feel quite small again. I'll feel like I was a 5-year-old and I was stuck in a car that my parents were driving, or that like there was nowhere to go. I didn't have an iPod yet.
Right.
RIP to my iPod. And there's no way to hide other than to cover my ears. And then eventually I'll be told like, oh, you're being rude. So I would just literally be trapped. So yeah, I think there is like a logical. So much of the condition feels illogical as well, which is very frustrating. It's like, why does that bother me? That's just a complete harmless thing. Like, I'm not gonna. Fair enough, a spider or like an insect or a snake, but okay, maybe less so a spider. But like, it's a sound, it's a sneeze or whatever. It's that for me was quite frustrating. So I think almost knowing that there are layers of it, and that sometimes feeling something in the present can be worse because in the past it has been bad.
Right.
That
Yes, a great way of putting it. Yeah.
that understanding sometimes helps, or almost. And also when I'm anticipating it, I can also feel that, okay, I'm feeling more tense, I'm feeling a bit more triggered. This is because of XYZ. And even if ultimately I can't explain like the initial reason why it hurt when I was really young, I think having some understanding
Hmm.
helps. and hopefully in the future having a bit more understanding will help even more. A lot of it for me was the loss of control and not being able to understand or make sense of what was happening, and therefore also not knowing how bad it would get. Like okay, I
Right.
felt like I don't want to be here. I felt like I need to do something violent or do self-defense or whatever, but I don't know. Like maybe there'll be a worse sound that will make me want to do something more. Maybe
Mm.
there'll be a sound that will make me have a heart attack. I don't know. Like I don't know. Um, it's that loss of control and the not understanding that made it terrifying, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, these are feelings that are natural for like someone who's 5 years old. There's like logic.
Yeah.
There's no. You can't really expect a 5 year old to be logical, and but you can expect them to not to be afraid of like or not know how bad something can get. And if that's still inside you, because I've talked to so many people who are who've had some past where they're walking on eggshells for a while, whether it's like an alcoholic dad or facing some kind of abuse
Oh,
from
wow.
something else. And so it was just I'm not saying I'm not trying to connect the dots for you or anything, but it's an interesting thing to think about that I try to just ask people of was there something in the past that maybe um, caused you more than once or more than once that maybe at a chronic um, level make you feel like you had to walk on eggshells to not set somebody off. So
Yeah.
so yeah, we got to
Mhm.
university, and then yeah, you found misophonia, the term. And did you then? I forget. Did you then start to see a professional? I'm just kind of curious how that journey went.
Yeah, so it was actually I was dating someone who had like really bad anxiety at the time.
Mm,
So yeah, he said, "Oh, you need to talk to a therapist," and he recommended everyone at university should just as a way to explore yourself and explore your childhood, and it was probably the best thing I ever did.
hmm
So I was kind of thinking about it before I found the term misophonia, but that tipped me into I cannot eat, I cannot like go to lectures. I skipped the whole exam at some point. I was just, and I was also still very much trying to keep up appearances. And I think I was quite good at seeming, because I did really well in school, in part because I knew from a young age I need to get out. I need to have my own
Yeah.
home. I need to make hay while the sun shines. I felt like the world was narrowing and I need to be like amazingly talented or successful enough to balance out for whatever hell waited in the future. So I was very intense as a student
hmm
when I was younger. So I was good at keeping up like appearances, and I think people expected me to be okay. And I was just used to protecting, especially people I loved, from worrying about me. So
hmm
yeah, it was when I couldn't eat, and it was at some point I was living next to a student who would talk through the night. He must have been a gamer because he was in a different time zone or something, but he would just be talking all through the night. And I didn't even know if the sounds were actually triggering, but I was afraid that they would become triggering and that I
hmm
would be trapped. And I would not sleep, and I would just go to lectures. I would just kind of go to bed, lay there. Maybe I'll sleep like 1 hour, and then I would just go to lectures like, this is fine, everything's fine. And I was not okay. I was very, um, yeah, very isolated and very nihilistic. I also studied philosophy as part of my degree. So I wanted to do to challenge my kind of sheltered upbringing.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to be a writer, and I felt like, well, I need to understand, all the like deep
Right.
ideas and yeah. And that completely unraveled all the belief systems I had. I became very nihilistic studying some of those modules, and it was all at the same time. I was also studying like a history module or something, and we were looking at genocide. So it was just like all the worst of humanity. I was
Yeah.
just thinking around, and yeah, I just had to. So I stayed on campus like quite late into summer instead of going home to my parents' place, and just saw a therapist. And I'd never spoken to anyone about my childhood or about feelings. Even the friendships that I had in school were quite, we didn't go into like, I didn't like being vulnerable, being emotionally vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we were very creative, kind of like theatre kid type of thing. And we would play music together. They were great friends, but I never took my mask off completely,
Mm.
you know. So talking to a therapist like everything, and that blew my mind. Like even that I'd never reflected on. my childhood and never expressed things aloud.
Hmm.
It was a very intense time, but yeah, I always say like if you can see a therapist,
Did they help you
especially at
at
that
all?
time, it's amazing. Not so much with the
Yeah.
misophonia. In fact, I think
Right.
they probably scared me out of talking uh, about it for a while because he'd never heard of it, the therapist. So it was probably around 2013, 14,
Yeah.
but I'd never heard of it. And when his reaction when I said like, "Well, some sounds make me feel unsafe," and his reaction was to like start making sounds. Like, how does this make you feel? I was like,
Oh
could
my
you not?
God.
Like,
Yeah.
no. So I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna try this again because obviously, and I think he was also very skeptical. Like, well, you shouldn't really self-diagnose yourself with things on the internet. You can't really assume things. It might be this,
Oh,
that, that. And I was just
right.
like, these symptoms are so specific, and fair enough, like there could be other conditions involved, but I just felt like I was being not taken seriously, and that was always a fear that I'd had since childhood because I'd not been taken seriously as a kid, and that had ended very horribly. So I would just put that away. But I had plenty
Hmm.
of other issues to talk through, and I think they were all kind of stemming from the issues that I had with sound because I had it from such a young age. So much of my personality was shaped around trying to survive. I was in survival mode a lot of the time. So yeah, there were lots of other issues that I had to work through.
Right. So
But
okay. So
yeah.
this therapist didn't help at all, and yeah, it's amazing as far as we've come in just talking about mental health. Like we're still at the bottom of the barrel. Misophonia is just
Yeah.
is kind of the ugly duckling of mental health conditions.
I'm curious
Um,
about
yeah.
other people you're speaking to, like as well.
Hmm.
Well, I've only listened to one other episode. I was a bit cautious, but yeah, I'm curious about whether there are therapists who are a bit more, what's the word, clued in or open-minded or able to help a bit more.
Yeah, there are, and they always have a giant wait list because there are not enough
Oh,
of
yeah,
them. But yeah, there's a bunch of research groups at universities in the UK. There's a big community of people with misophonia in the UK. Then
yeah.
there are also some um, excellent therapists. Dr. Jane Gregory is at Oxford. She was on the podcast. I know her quite well. Actually, I saw her in Oxford a few weeks ago. She has misophonia, and she's one of the top researchers in the field. Um,
Well,
and yeah, you can maybe listen to her episode, and I can
good to,
connect
yeah.
you. There are a few, a number here in the United States, but never enough. Like whenever I talk to them, they've always got a huge wait list. But I think with more, awareness and more people speaking up, and I think there will be more. But yeah, it's always hard to kind of like you can't just you know um, go on the internet and just find the first therapist and assume they're going to know anything. You really have to do your
That's the thing.
research, your due diligence. Otherwise, yeah, it could end up pretty bad. They could really, if someone kind of goes in assuming a therapist is going to know about it, it could be quite damaging. So, because if they're
Yeah,
not taken seriously, um, you said something earlier about when you said you weren't taken seriously as a child and it ended up badly. Are you talking about misophonia and um, how your family treated you,
yeah,
or okay? And
yeah.
did
And
it?
I understand from their perspective as well
Yeah,
that there's probably as well, like just the way that they dealt with stuff when they were growing up is okay, if something is difficult, you have to learn to face it, and
right.
you can't expect the world to soften to make room for you. You've got to toughen up. And uh, I sometimes say I feel like I was raised with some toxic masculinity, like so just like no crying, just man up.
Yeah,
And so I was often told, okay, you're too sensitive. How are you going to get through life? I'm like, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. You're the parent. Help me. But I think also it was tough for them raising kids in a new environment and with the religion as well. They gave the tools that they had and that had worked for them, and
right.
it was always from love. But at the time, it didn't feel like that, and especially when yeah, there wasn't really anywhere I could go. When I started getting when I got an iPod and when I got technology, got myself a little netbook that I used to play white noise on. That made things a lot easier, just having a way to protect myself other than covering my ears. So I
Hmm.
used to literally just press my hands with my ears to try to get to sleep. or hide in the toilet for ages until things were a bit quieter in our bedroom. And then also we moved house and I eventually got my own room, which helped. But then I didn't really
Hmm.
want to come out of my room. So yeah, it was probably tough as well raising me as well. And
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Parents are
I appreciate
sometimes
that. Yeah.
more um sometimes even they're some of the most desperate people looking for answers because yeah, it can be
Yeah.
quite tough for them too. Did it cause a distance and a kind of like a unspoken rifts between yourself and family members?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well because I don't know if other people experience this, but when someone makes a triggering sound, sometimes it feels deliberate. It feels like a personal attack. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how could you not know this feels horrible? How could you do this to me? And when it's coming from a loved one as well, and if I've also mentioned in the past, like, could you not do that? And they just do it, it kind of felt like, well, they want to make my life hell. They must hate me.
Right.
And I could also think of lots of other reasons why they might. I was the middle, well, I'm the middle kid, so probably had some kind of complex about like, well, I'm not the favorite, I'm not like the younger one or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I already had like all kinds of narratives, and there was a bit of like an emo thing at school when I was there. So it was very much like, got no one understands me.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of that feeling, and as well, like my parents being from Ghana, I felt like there was a lot that we had different perspectives on growing up, especially as my um, religion faded away. I felt a lot more distant and
Mm-hmm.
disappointed a lot of the time in some of the traditions and some of the perspectives that I've been raised in, and that was frustrating. And I think as well, I would look at other people's families and kind of think, would it be easier if and it's easier to look at the what you see of other people's families and other people's homes and think, would this is am I inherently set up to have a very difficult life, or would it have been different if I'd had different circumstances? Or you can never really know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard somebody else say that, but I had similar thoughts growing up once in a while where I'd be like, what if I, grown up in that family or this other family?
Yeah,
That's something I understandably we don't say out loud because it's,
yeah,
it's not it's not pleasant for others to hear, but it's
exactly.
not like it happens a lot, but yeah, it crosses an immigrant's mind.
Yeah,
Um,
and there was also a lot that I'm really thankful to my
mhm,
family for, because there's a lot that, like, even my passion for creative writing and stuff like that. I don't know that I had been able to lean into that if they weren't so keen on us reading and being into books. And like my
mhm.
mum would take us to the theatre and stuff and really supportive on the academic side. So I'm really thankful for a lot of it. It's kind of the thing with like, I can see how misophonia has held me back and I can see all the ways it's limited me, but I can also see I wouldn't be who I am without it. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't have the joys that make life worth living without it. So it's just kind of there, and it's part of what life is.
It's funny something you said earlier about not showing too much vulnerability and kind of being in the kind of I think you said you're kind of in the theater kid circle. I was never into the theater kids growing up because I was it seemed to be just what the white kids were doing, and I
Yeah.
found them to be a little too superficial. But it's interesting now, and just in the last couple of years, and I'm like in my 40s, I've kind of really interested in theater and musical theater partly because I've realized some of them are quite psychological and just the idea that like from Stephen Sondheim and whatnot, not necessarily like Wicked or whatever, but one interesting parallel I noticed is like sometimes it seems like we're living in our own musical where we have we want to break out in song or we just have this other world dancing and singing in our head when we're going through a trigger, but we have to show kind
Yeah,
of reality. So it's just fun that an interesting parallel where in musical theater, like there's normal life, and then all of a sudden you're in the person's head and they're singing in whatever emotions they have, and then they come back. Um,
that's actually I've not thought of that before. That's really cool.
mhm. So, so how is well, actually, maybe related to that, like in your own work, has kind of misophonia been something that you've expressed?
In my creative writing,
Yeah, in your creative writing.
no, not
No, yeah.
directly or explicitly. I think it shapes some of the characters
Mm-hmm.
that I write about. Like they're often outsiders, or they've got something that holds them back from feeling fully present, or fully connected with people who they might want to feel connected with. So I think there are aspects, but the actual um condition, no. I've tried to write about. I found it very triggering to write about,
Yeah.
and I also struggle with why am I writing about it? What kind of story is this going to be? Is it about documenting the experience and trying to, yeah, just show that okay, this is part of the human condition, or am I trying to explore it on a personal level? I do a lot of journaling, and I think
Mm.
more in my journaling. But even when I started writing, I would refer to it with little like code words, and I would try and be very secretive in my journals. And I still don't really write about it directly, I think, in my journaling. So I've not
Oh,
explored it.
really?
I think,
Even in your
yeah,
journaling? Oh, okay.
yeah. Partly because I didn't have a word for it for a very long time. When I
Ah,
found the word, I did write like this rambling entry. I do this sometimes. Maybe it is like the musical thing of feeling like, okay, I want to capture this moment. And I remember being in tears and shaking and writing in my journal, like, I've just found something that changes things. I'm not sure how it's going to change things, but I can feel it's changing something, and I want to like remember this moment. So I will document moments, but I find it difficult to write about. And I think a lot of my art and my writing is or began from trying to escape it and trying to explore worlds where it's not a barrier for me, and to empathize with characters who don't have it as well, and to, yeah, allow myself space to imagine stories and existences without the like limitations that it has brought into my life. I've not read
interesting.
about it much either. I've read about it in one novel a little bit, which was a bit weird to do.
Yeah.
And I find it very triggering actually to just the suggestion of it sometimes. And I think maybe that's because um I've just not read about it much. I've not encountered it. Tended to avoid it. So no, not much.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, I'm definitely yeah, but I'm always interested in how it's potentially explored in art. I mean,
Yeah.
there's that movie Tar where the main character has signs of it, although they never mention it by name. They never no characters ever discuss it, but it's just used as part of her character development, and that's I know it's kind of interesting to me because as you know we've talked in this last almost an hour. There's so many um ways it affects us that
Yeah,
over time, not just in the moment, but it's kind of a conversation between our past and our present sometimes, and so it's yeah,
it
I'd love to
is.
see it
I think
explored more.
as well sometimes I'm not sure I understand it as a condition on its own because it feels so
Mm-hmm.
entangled with other aspects of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's almost like I'm not sure that I can draw it into focus on its own well enough to, yeah, to explore it through another character or through a fictional space. So writing like nonfiction thing was a little bit easier.
Yeah,
Still tough,
I mean,
but
maybe that's
yeah,
part of exploring it. Maybe over time that'll come to you. Who
maybe.
knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So I guess maybe what are some of your other coping methods? I guess take it to the present. I guess how do you go day to day now? Uh, because I think I saw on your Instagram like you recently did a reading or something near the British Museum. I just noticed because I
Yeah.
happened to be staying there a little bit early, like weeks earlier.
I
Like when you're doing readings, do you ever get triggered by people in the audience, and does that throw you off? I guess it's easier than
agree.
if they were triggering you while you were writing, but
Yeah, that's the beauty of writing as well. Is that it's quite a solitary
yeah.
experience, and it's easy to avoid that. So I've not experienced triggers so far doing readings, and I think as well that they're quite short. So
Hmm.
that's another thing that I've kind of retain from childhood is that sense of things are tough right now, but okay, even if I don't believe in all the in quotes compensation or the joy that might have been guaranteed after suffering, there's going to be an end to it. And I know, like in the past, things have felt that's the worst. One of the worst things about like when you feel really triggered, it's like this is the worst thing in the world. I can't get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
life is horrible. And then it takes something very simple to just start to feel calm. Well, for me at the moment, anyway, and like just getting away from a trigger. So I try to remind myself, even if my body feels horrible, that it's temporary. In the past, it's felt just as bad, possibly worse because I was younger and I had fewer options for safety. But it's safe, and hey, I'll get myself some chocolate. I'll get myself
Yeah.
like a little something nice afterwards to try to remind myself that life life is nice. So yeah, I think just focusing on the temporary nature and being a bit more mindful. I started getting into meditating, which I've been cautious about because I do silence I struggle with. Like it's rare to find
Mm-hmm.
silence that is properly silent. So the idea of doing meditation or being mindful for a long time, and also that you've got to be quite grounded in the present. And I've survived by avoiding that, by trying to retreat to my imagination more. But lately, I've been using Headspace and doing some short exercises can help to just calm down a bit and get a sense of perspective and a sense of the full body. I think exercising more as well, like just getting into the body more, ironically, has helped more because, yeah, a lot of it feels like it's in my head. And in the moment when there is a trigger, it gets amplified by anxiety and
Mm-hmm.
just all the connections in the past of horrible things that have happened will come surfacing. So, yeah, I think like having more physical, being more anchored in my body and feeling that, yeah, that any hellish experiences that I do encounter will be temporary has helped so far. And I think as well, I tend to go to venues where I know that it won't be like too crowded or quiet or weird. Like I've got a good sense of what I'm comfortable with, and so far I've not had to compromise on that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And what at the job that you were at the day job you were at, was that remote or was that in an office?
oh, that's an interesting one. So initially it was in an office. There was an open
Mm.
plan office, which I've always struggled with,
Yep.
but with the pandemic, it did become remote, which was great in some ways, but also again because of not so much the misophonia itself, but more the worry that surrounds it. I was then thinking, am I making it worse by hiding from the things that would
Mm.
normally trigger me? Like, will it be extra intense when I go back out into the world?
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the reason I left because I was worried about. Like, I'd actually changed jobs as well during the pandemic, and I loved it, and I really enjoyed that space. I was working in energy, and I loved it, but I'd never like met the team in the office. I'd not had to experience working in that different department before. And I was a bit nervous, like, okay, things are starting to get back to normal now. How will it be readjusting? And it was a struggle, even just because I wouldn't even go to the supermarket get my groceries delivered. And at the same time, it's the thing of not understanding how the condition works as well. And hearing about some people saying exposure helps, or some
Mm.
people say that if you're alone, you'll notice other things that will just make things worse anyway. And I did notice like sometimes I would worry. Like at one point, I was reading and I would look at like the shape of letters and think, is that triggering me? I don't know if I'm going to be okay. Like, what if I can't read? What if the voice in my head starts to trigger me when I'm reading?
Ah.
And
Ah.
it was almost like, yeah, the anxiety around it was
Mm-hmm.
what made it more scary. Even though in the present, in reality, I was working from home. I felt safe. I enjoyed the job. It was just the worry that was absolutely terrifying.
Did you do anything to end that worry? I mean, you said are taking a break from the job, but uh,
Yeah.
are you doing anything maybe else to kind of like try to think differently about try to reduce that anxiety?
Yeah, I think I started. Well, it was in the pandemic, so
Meditation and yeah. Well, yeah, I guess a lot of people that was maybe
yeah,
a common anxiety in the
I
pandemic that
think as well. Like some people were saying, well, long COVID can make you feel a bit more anxious as well. I had COVID twice, and I think it's well, I was living by
mm,
myself.
mm,
So I was just feeling very like precarious, and isolated again. So there were a lot of factors that I just felt like I don't know that I would be able to cope in the way that I used to, like going on the tube, commuting in,
Mm-hmm.
sitting in an office where you don't know who's going to sit next to you hour to hour, doing lunch in the cafeteria. I was like, how did I survive that? And it's, I think I'm really grateful that I've been able to ease back into going out more at my own pace because of the novel and because of um,
Yeah.
yeah, having space to work on that and having support to work on the novel. So I've just been going out a bit more, take a tube into London, go to a cafe, meet up with friends. It took me a long time to get comfortable just going out. Like I would have a panic attack before leaving the flat,
Right.
and sometimes I would cancel. And friends like, I can't meet you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I would be like, I have my hair done, I'd be all dressed up and everything, but I can't go out because I don't know how bad it's going to be if I'm going to feel safe. I don't remember how I coped, and I've gotten used to being inside.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes as well, the idea of like being a hermit writer would appeal to me of
Right.
being, yeah, living in quite a rural. I really want to live by the sea at some point as well. So, but I also love being involved with policy and involved with like current affairs and connecting with the world and connecting with people. So it's good to be able to like ease into that at what feels like a more sustainable pace. But there is always that uncertainty of, is this making things better or worse? Am I,
Right.
if things are going to get worse anyway, maybe I should try and make the most of going out and stuff while I still can, you know?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like yeah, it sounds like the release of the book and maybe some of the meditation exercise are kind of helping you engage with the world a little bit more.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the book as we kind of like start to wind down a bit? I'd love to hear about the book and kind of how that's going, and maybe if you have anything else in the works.
Yeah. So my first novel that's set in contemporary London. I used to write speculative fiction and
Mm.
a bit more abstract stuff, but this felt much more grounded in the world as it was before the pandemic, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved writing a novel, and it's about like a kind of eclectic shop and the friendships and relationships that form in that space and around that space as the city changes and as different characters come under different pressures. So there's a boy who's like British Ghanaian who has like a lot of pressure at home and at school, and he finds refuge and inspiration in that space. And there's kind of an older shopkeeper as well. His wife has passed away and is struggling to stay in the present with potential addiction and some other issues that he's going through with. So yeah, it's about what these characters learn about themselves and about the way they want the shop and the wider world to be
Mm.
while change is happening around them.
Fascinating. Yeah, I can see some maybe
For
metaphors with misophonia and the
sure. Yeah.
the mind, the introverted mind, and the rest of the world. Yeah, it's exciting. Um, well, yeah, Susie, this has been a fascinating hour. It just flew by as it usually
It's gone
does.
so
But
quickly. Wow.
um, yeah, thank you again. Is any kind of anything else you want to share with folks?
We've not touched much on musical technology, but yeah, I'm also curious about
Mm,
whether other people who have this condition experience music in positive ways too, or more intense ways maybe than other people. And
yeah, that's
yeah,
really interesting. I mean, music has been kind of a big part of my life. I don't do music in technology. I don't want to talk about me the whole time, but I'm surrounded by synthesizers and guitars and recording equipment right now at my desk while I'm also a software engineer, kind of in my day job.
amazing.
But yeah, I mean, I sometimes think about like I used listening to music as a kind of an escape, like it was for a lot of people. But another interesting thing, which I don't know if I've ever shared, but I got a lot of my audio and music, well, especially my audio, um, interest from my dad, who was actually ended up being one of my first triggers, um, and I think I used music to kind of like obviously get away from triggers, but then also to kind of hide from a lot of the religious stuff growing up. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of I don't know
Amazing.
if there's any relation there, because that obviously touches a lot of parts of my life. So, But yeah, music is a big part of my life
Yeah.
now, and I don't write music as much, but I've been inspired by stories from the podcast, and I'm trying to think if I can use some of those into some kind of work, whether it's an album or some kind of I don't know, musical theater piece. So yeah, it's something I've connected recently again, but music has always been um,
Yeah.
part of my interest, and I thought it was going to be my kind of career for a while, not necessarily as a musician, but as a someone who kind of like uses engineering to design
As
music
an
gear,
engineer.
and I did that for a while. Um, but I'm also I have kind of a low attention span, so I kind of like went into other industries, but
Uh,
again, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, music's been just something I'm always thinking about on every level, technology and just kind of the emotions of it.
yeah.
So how about yours for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I played in a band in our church because it was a
Mm,
Pentecostal church. So it was one of those modern electric guitars, although I was electroacoustic and drummer and bass guitarist, and lots of African and Caribbean people in the congregation too. So we'd have a lot of dance and really fun music times. And I think that helped me a lot in the church as well, because if I'm in a wall of noise, it's much easier than, sitting in the pews with someone like in
right.
kind of silence. So yeah, and I used to write songs, but I play by ear. So I was wondering if other people have like an ear for music, if that's something
Yeah.
that
Yeah, it's
is.
interesting. I don't know if yeah, I've sometimes wondered if like would where me or we may be more susceptible to like perfect pitch or whatnot. I think I did well at like knowing intervals just from listening to them, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
I don't know if I necessarily have a much better ear than another trained musician just because of my misophonia. Um, but yeah. Well, we'll have to talk about music at another time. But
Maybe, yeah.
but yeah, no, this has been great. Yeah, thanks again for coming on, and best of luck with the book. And I'll have links to that and anything you write in the future. I hope we can stay in touch.
For sure. Thanks very much.
Thank you again, Susie. Such a great conversation, and good luck with everything with your writing. And I'd love to talk more in the future about music and sound. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast. Follow me there or on Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, and on Twitter, it's Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon, patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Theme music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.